defibrillator. All right, we'll go ahead here and kind of start working through this. Before we do, Mr. Ford's just bringing around the resolution that we approved our last meeting. Just needs everybody to sign that. And then also, I'll go ahead and throw these out here before we get to other specific items. But you also have in front of you some proposed amendments to the agenda for Thursday night. One would be the calendar adoption for 21-22, and then also some general purpose budget amendments. Just put that on your radar, you guys. We'll get to that at the end if you want to. Give you a little time to look over that. I just want you to know what you're looking at, and then when we get down here to the bottom of what we already have scheduled, we can come back to that if you'd like to. All right. So, and then also, I would really like for us to just kind of proceed tonight as we have the last couple of agenda sessions. I'm not going to go line item by line item through this thing. If you've got a question about an item, let's go ahead and just wait to be recognized there, and then ask your question of the administrative staff, and we'll move through this thing. All right? So with that, I'll open it up for any item that you'd like to take a look at. Go ahead, Mrs. Thurman.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I guess I got really excited when I saw water access. I thought we were buying boatfront property or something. But anyway, I have a few questions about that policy. Can we go ahead and talk about the policy, or somebody else something else? The water access. Okay. Is this for the COVID thing? Is about the lead thing? What exactly? Why are we doing this right now?
Worked with them on this policy, so it's more just giving us a standard practice moving forward with how we deal with them.
Oh, okay, well.
Should cost. It's something we can look at. Definitely, I think in quoting price, looking at it per unit and seeing what we can bring to scale. So we can look at. I think how to do it equitably is to, obviously this is for new construction or major renovation. We can look at a couple, maybe in each building, or take a ratio. We'll look at it. Yeah. We'll look at it, maybe take a ratio of students per building and say we'll try to do X amount per X amount of students. So we can absolutely take a look at that. I think from the standpoint, obviously, we all hope nothing COVID-related ever comes back, but
Yeah.
in the future, if it did, it kind of solves that problem, right? If you have some retrofitted. So it's definitely something we can look at.
And probably something, maybe something that we could even incorporate into CARES going forward to
Maybe
look
not
at.
just filling station, but at least have everything, get a little cup of water, like we used to, the little white cups or something, because a lot of kids forget their water bottle or lose them, like my grandkids do 3 times a week at least. So at least they can get some water. It just bothers me that some kids are not able to get something to drink at school. It's just very concerning. But I was just real confused about what this was. Because it says under section 7, what is that? I don't understand what that is. It says the school district shall require those public schools described under section 7
So,
to have water filling bottles. What does that mean? I was kind of confused about that as well.
Section 7 of the policy just points to any new construction or major renovation. So that the policy would only apply to those 2 categories.
Okay, section, I didn't know
I
what
think
section
our
7
version
was.
has a typo in it. It looks like everything just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, because I had that same question. The printout, maybe the bullets got messed up. 'Cause we don't have a section 7.
You're right, it's mislabeled, yeah, it didn't continue numbering, so section 7, Ms. Thurman, is the, number 2. This section, the very last line, number 2, the very last number 2 you see, it
Okay.
should be 7.
Okay, I was just real confused about the whole thing. Okay,
I apologize, that was my typo.
okay. Right. Anybody else want to say anything about that one?
About that, okay, go ahead, Dr. Highland.
Just very briefly, a lot of school I've worked in has filling stations, and they are it's not just COVID, it's a lot like children get less colds, they get less flu, it's a lot healthier. I've seen a lot of children through the years put their mouth down on the fountain, put their hands on the water, and so I just think it's very positive. Overall health, I mean, obviously during COVID it'd be helpful, but any time, for any kind of infectious disease. Thank you.
Mrs. Jones, was your cup out there? Okay. Mrs. Robinson, was yours about this? Okay, go ahead, and then I'll get to Ms. Hill.
Yeah, I was just curious, are we seeing grants or any type of like federal program around this policy as well? I thought I'd read that somewhere.
Not for this particular policy.
Okay.
But Tim, I will add, there's a provision in CARES as far as facilities
Yeah.
are concerned, where we can use a portion of CARES dollars
Right.
for COVID related, and frankly, you know, this probably falls under that purview, so it's something we will look at within that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Ms. Hill?
Talk me through the ongoing costs related to these. I know we're going to need to purchase filters. So as you all have done the math on this, what's the ongoing expense that's different from a standard water fountain?
You do have to replace the filters. I think it's once per year, and I'm gonna have to go back and find the price on what the filters cost. It's not a significant price, and we can do the replacing with our plumbers. So it's whatever the cost for each of the filters is. And I'll, before Thursday, make sure I get an exact number on it, and how often but I think it's once per year. I don't know
So, yep, Justin Witt said around $75 per filter one time per year.
Okay, so $75 times how many, you know, I mean, that's the kind of number I'd be
Absolutely.
interested to understand.
Yeah.
You know, as we add ongoing maintenance costs.
So what we'll do, based on, if it's the pleasure of the board, this policy is about new buildings, new construction, and renovation, major renovation. If it's the pleasure of the board, we'll spend the next couple of days kind of going through some kind of modeling to look at, you know, how we could, I won't say saturate, but how we could get some of these on campuses. But then we'll also do an assessment of the recurring costs, so that you understand if we have 100 of them and we're doing 75 per, you know, what we're going to have to budget in our recurring line item to be able to support that. So that's absolutely something we'll look at. And candidly, probably what we do from a strategic standpoint is we take, because of the way ESSER 2.0 runs, we don't have to fully spend those funds until 2023. And so what we probably do is buy ourselves a couple, 3 years of filter runtime in that line item, if we could, if we know that's something that we wanted to do strategically across some of the schools.
So just some quick math. And if we take 44,000 students as a round number and divide it by 200, because I thought the policy at one point we were talking about 100, it's per 200. You're talking about $16,000 to $17,000 if we had one for every 200 across 44,000 kids. And
Okay.
again, this policy is just about new construction or
Right.
existing
So
renovation.
pretty minimal amount of
I mean,
money. Okay,
16, I'm not saying it's not a lot of money, but across the district, that's,
right, if we were at full saturation, which we will not.
Yes,
be.
ma'am.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else got something on that item in particular? All right, Mrs. Thurman, did you have another one?
Yes, because I'm just getting into some of the policy. First of all, I had a question. I see that the policies were done by Nakia and Jennifer Bronson. It says Jennifer Bronson is the chief of staff. I thought we did away with that position when we gave you a different title, because just like moving you to a different title, but you didn't have a change of salary or anything. So
Yeah.
where did the other position come from?
It's not a position, it's existing, and, and so as we get through COVID and we got the COVID fellow, it's really just signaling she's taking on a little bit more. She's already in the role and serving in the role. She's taking on more responsibility, helping with
Is this
policy.
one of the, I
and such.
mean, I thought we just did away with the chief of staff and made Nakia's position. And I guess I did come before the board that I remembered,
Well,
to
'cause
make
it-
a new position, because somewhere along the line, there has to be a new position.
Not a new position, not an added position. Not an added position,
Well,
not a
then
new
Nakia's
position.
position had to be an added position.
It wasn't. She's already been in the district.
Well-
Serving, so. And I'm not, it's expanded on her roles.
Okay, in our budget, there's gonna be a new line of because of a position that was not there before.
There's not. There's not. I didn't backfill her position.
Yeah, but, but we didn't do, otherwise, there's a new position there has to be. Okay, if Nakia was still chief of staff, where would Jennifer Bronson fit?
Jennifer Bronson was serving as integrated school support. She was lead student success.
I know, but now she's chief of staff. I mean, I saw that. I mean,
Yes.
I'm just trying,
Yeah, so then we pulled her, did backfill that position. We pulled her into the role of supporting COVID-19 support, right? Then we ended up funding, we didn't end up funding, we ended up getting grant funding for a COVID fellow. And that COVID fellow has picked up much of the contact tracing under her purview, still under her purview, but expanding her talents and capacity.
I think, Dr. Johnson, to that point, what we cut was, we used to have 2 community outreach facilitators for the Opportunity Zone. We cut one of them. So that's the net, that we didn't add any positions. And the position that Jennifer Bronson held, John Cunningham is filling that position, which is 100% grant funded. Jim Bronson's position was 100% grant funded last year. So we cut a head count, in fact, when we reorganized the learning communities.
And that was all done through the last budget. I mean, it was all done through the last budget cycle.
okay. I'm gonna have to think through that one, because that was a lot of, like I say, somewhere along the line, there's another position in there. When you take somebody out of one position, and, I mean, whatever, that's neither here nor there. I just kinda noticed that, and it kinda jumped out at me today. I thought, oh, I didn't think we had a chief of staff anymore, but now we do. But anyway, on this, educator diversity,
Mrs. Thurman?
yes.
Hang on one second, before you
Okay.
move on to that one,
Okay.
did you want to say something about that item?
Oh, I'm
Mrs.
sorry.
Jones?
Yeah, so I wanted to see if maybe you should expound upon what a fellow is and how that's paid for. Because I'm a fellow in my job and it's not,
Yeah.
so kind of expound on that, so then maybe she might.
Yeah.
it
No,
might
I
bring
know what a
greater
fellow
clarity.
is. I know exactly what a fellow is. We've had fellows here.
No, I'm just saying
I've
it
been on
might
the
bring
school
greater,
board.
Dr. Johnson, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So that was a grant-funded role. We initially, when I go back all the way to COVID, we've been dealing with COVID, y'all. And so we initially were hoping to get a piece of software that was going to allow everybody to put in, every day is going to ask parents and students to put in
information around, whether or not they were self-monitoring or self-checking themselves. So really a self-screen that a parent would do at home. That software was going to be grant funded. It was well over $100,000. And so as we started setting up the school year, and Jen Bronson was really leading COVID work, as we started setting up the school year, what we realized is the hope was that software would be ready, wasn't going to be ready, and we were already able to operate in school. It was going to be too much to ask folks to go back and to implement that. So what we did was we went back to the foundation and asked them, could we repurpose those dollars to hire a COVID fellow? Additionally, there was an organization, and really we got the idea, there was an organization that was allowing you to apply for grants for COVID fellows, and they collapsed the ability to be able to go after those grants. And so what we did was, we really thought the idea was really sound, and so that's when we asked to convert those funds that had been appropriated by the foundation for that piece of software to be able to hire a COVID fellow. So that fellow allows us to really expand our capacity. It gives us a conduit between the health department and schools. It's multiple, different areas of support that provide.
So the grant ends?
Yeah, the grant will
The
end,
grant
absolutely.
will end, and so we will pay for that position.
We will not. We will
Manna
not.
from heaven?
No, no.
They just gonna go away. Like
Yeah,
I
so
am.
you should have got
The fellow will go away, but the chief of staff, she will continue to be chief of staff.
So to be clear, you should have got a report today, and I'm happy to explain this.
Well, my daughter's in the hospital, so I haven't seen any of your reports today, so.
So I'm just sharing, you should have got a report today from Ryan Ledford. You got reports other weeks too, not just today, it comes on Monday, from Ryan Ledford, is the COVID fellow. And so, once that grant runs out, he understood that didn't come into the role.
Well, I'm not worried about him, I'm worried about this chief of staff position, really the fellow's not, I understand completely what fellows are.
Does she not go back to her job at that point?
She'll continue, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We're just going around and around here, and it's not this complicated. Nakia got a superintendent, her, whatever you want to say, expanded. Ms. Bronson.
I understand everything. Oh, listen, I'm not stupid, I understand exactly what's happening. I just wonder where the money's coming from.
There's no money, they just got different titles, is all we're talking about. We're talking about semantics here. It balances. There was no new
But the
position.
fellow's money goes away.
The fellow will go away.
Okay, that was the Jennifer Bronson said, it would go away. So Jennifer was put into the chief of staff that, like I said, I understand completely. I've seen this rodeo before. But anyway.
Clear.
Okay,
She's not a fellow.
I know exactly, I understand,
So-
I got it, I get it. Trust me, I get it more than you understand. But anyway, on this educator diversity policy, we list all of these names. Minority educator includes, but is not limited to, an educator who is Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Asian American, Native, Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or American Indian or Alaska Native, or two or more races as reported by the educator in the state licensure database. Why don't we just put in there, everybody except white people?
It's a state,
Okay.
so this is
Okay,
state,
well, okay,
this is
state,
state board.
okay,
This
is this their wording?
This is, yes, we took it, we lifted it off the state
Okay, well,
board.
whatever, we have to adopt their language, I mean,
Yes.
this just seems to be so wrong.
Do you have a?
Just remember, this is
This seems to be so wrong. I don't care if it is in the state, I'll tell the state this is so wrong. I mean, it's just like, we're gonna miss somebody. and it's gonna be, say, oh, well, you didn't put me in there. I mean, if this is what we're trying to get to, I would just say it.
Well, so the state is concerned about hiring initiatives that are designed to mirror the students that we're educating. And there's hosts of data that students respond to the environments that they're in. And Tennessee, the State Department of Education, the State Board of Education have both been acutely aware for decades that if you look at the number of minorities who are in the professions, they are underrepresented in the education profession. And so the State Board of Education finally decided, you know, if we're going to do something about it, we need to be intentional. Really all the state has done to this point is basically adopted a policy of mindfulness, and they've asked local boards to be similarly mindful. I think you can take up a lot of your questions and concerns with the state board and say, why did you say this, why did you say that? I think the bigger picture here is the state board really does want local school systems to be aware of the fact that as a profession, minorities are underrepresented in your teacher ranks. And I think the assumption behind this policy isn't so much the details you're getting into. I understand your details, but I think the assumption here is if you don't think about it, you're not going to do anything about it. The situation is not going to change if you don't think about how you can intentionally study this pipeline. It doesn't even do you any good to recruit highly qualified minority professionals if they end up matriculating and going somewhere else. So you train an entire cadre of highly qualified, and that's true for everyone, obviously. If Hamilton County Schools does a great job of recruiting and training highly qualified teachers, but then they get piped by some other education agency, either closer to Atlanta or closer to Nashville, you haven't really moved the needle. So the purpose of this policy that has been put to this board is the same thing as what the state has looked at. Statewide, we need to think about what we can do differently to change the makeup of the profession. And I'm looking at the education professionals and I'm asking, I'm a lawyer, did I do an okay job explaining that to the educators who have to go out and recruit and retain? Penny, when you comment on this, this is one of those things where your demographics don't change accidentally. You have to be intentional. Maybe you can comment on some of the things you are doing and how this doesn't really, this is not foreign language to you. This reflects what you are already doing.
That's what I wanted to teach for America, I recall.
Well, I was just gonna say, looking over this, and you look at the Roman numerals, I mean, it's great that the state has decided they need a policy on this, but I mean, if you all look through, just the first 2 or 3 Roman numerals, I mean, we're already doing a majority of this stuff. I mean, you're talking about recruitment strategies, you're talking about retention strategies, you're talking about identifying prospective educators. They even go to a grow your own initiative. I mean, again, these are all things that our district, is already doing. So, I don't know. I don't want to use the word comical, but it is almost as if the state's decided to maybe get on board after the fact.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because I thought that's why we hired Teach for America.
Well, I would say, but even
And
before that,
they're already doing this. That's what I
before
understand.
that, with Mr. Fogelman, if you all remember when he came on board, our recruitment strategies, retention strategies, and I will use Scott's word, the mindfulness about, how are we going to attract a more diverse teaching force, as he started talking about all the different places that he was trying to recruit and pull from that traditionally maybe the school system had not done before. So, and I can speak just from an intimate knowledge of the local higher education institutions that have education programs, it's a lot deeper than those institutions being mindful and thoughtful and strategic. It goes even deeper than that, and so, and some of that goes to, again, what we are doing, or the school system is doing, when it comes to even the Teacher Prep Academy, Teaching and Learning Academy at Tyner. You know, there aren't very many folks doing that, so it goes way deeper than, hey, just going and recruiting. There has to be a pool to recruit from, and so that there's even a deeper issue there to start to generate a diverse pool. So it's not comfortable, is not the right word, but it's just, if you will look through this, we are already doing most of this stuff, so. Sorry, I didn't want to cut whoever was going to address that from the administration, but I just wanted to say that.
Well, Joe, I guess what I was trying, I think, you know, when we go to all these classes at TSBA, they tell you not to tie yourself up in policies. This is my whole point. This just looks like me, it just ties us up, I mean, because you're gonna leave somebody out of this list.
Well,
And I mean, it's just one of those things, I mean, you're gonna say everybody else but white people, why not just go ahead and say it instead of just, you know, tiptoeing around it, if that's what they wanna say, instead of us saying, oh, well, you left us out of this right here. You know, you didn't put us in there. So, you know, so I say, we're already doing all of this stuff, so I just don't see why we have to be so precise and give us something we can stub our toe on at some point, and somebody can call us out on.
Just a couple things. I think, one, we're creating policy because the state board
I
is
understand
still
that.
create policy. But two, I will say this, at the state level and systemically, we still have struggled with getting diverse candidates. And that's why, that was the impetus, frankly, for the state board going after this policy, I believe, is just because statewide it's a challenge just trying to get diverse educators into the field. And so policy, again, Penny and for that Keith, we've done a lot of work really in trying to recruit, retain. I absolutely think grow your own. Penny, you may know numbers off the top of your head. How many of those, do you know how many of those candidates are minority candidates? We think it's going to be a great vehicle for recruiting. I'll put you on the spot, I know.
Yeah, at least of our current program, we have, if you look at our high needs and hard to stop areas, we have over 65%. So, and then Project Inspire, we are pushing them as well to recruit diverse candidates for us, as well as you mentioned TFA. And then we also have our Grow Your Own, and as Chairman Wingate mentioned, our Tyner Teaching Academy. So we're creating and working through multiple pipelines to bring in diverse candidates.
And I think it is relevant. I think it is relevant for context while we have you, Penny. What is the current percentage of our educators that are white to Ms. Thurman's point?
So we currently, if you look at our current data, if you look at 3,088 teachers, only 319 of those teachers are color.
So what percentage are white?
Are white.
I'm sorry.
90%.
90%.
And how,
Okay, well, is that our fault? That's my whole point.
nobody said you tell us how long we've been at that percentage?
For several years, we have stayed stagnant. Our percentage of teachers of color has not increased, we have stayed stagnant despite our efforts for the past several years.
Despite our efforts, thank you.
Ms. Jones?
Which is why we need to do more, yeah.
It's okay, I'm okay, I'm okay.
All right, Mrs. Robinson?
I slightly forgot what I was even going to say or ask. So the state, since the state board is pushing this, and obviously this is a state initiative, or, you know, it's become this new state initiative, do we foresee the state providing any funding to districts? I mean, we have already been doing this, and we've been carving it out of our own budget, which is great. I'm a big supporter of that. I'm just kind of curious if the state is thinking about assisting districts with this to maybe even like ramp up some of these programs.
So we are in partnership with UTC for a Grow Your Own program that the state is funding.
Okay.
For this year.
Okay, so we don't foresee any like new funding coming with this policy.
I think the pinch point, that they'll be some help with funding specific strategies that may help with diverse pipe, but not an overarching funding strategy for this policy per se.
And are we still active in recruiting from historically black colleges? At one point we had like a roadshow going? Are we
Yeah.
still doing that?
Yes, we are, and we're still reaching out to them, of course, virtually right now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's a Zoom show right now.
It's a
Yeah, it's a Zoom show right now.
Yeah, how, well, yeah, and I think that like one thing for everyone to remember is that one element of why it's so important to recruit for minorities as well into the teaching field is because we don't have a big, there's not a big pipeline period across the country of minorities entering the teaching field. And we know that looking back historically, we can point to why that is, and it's that historically they weren't allowed to be in the teaching profession. And so creating initiatives like this makes all the sense in the world because in the past there hasn't been that opportunity for them to come into the teaching field, and therefore this pipeline or this larger percentage of minorities being teachers in general, like throughout the entire country, has been there's been a lack of the pipeline of it, and so really this is creating room for an opportunity at hand.
Brett.
So reading the state's policy, although it doesn't go into detail, it does say that they will monitor the LEAs regarding, I guess, the effectiveness of that. I'm sure being a new policy, they don't even know what expectations to put there. But I think it's important that as we establish the policy, we keep an eye on what that monitoring is, because as everyone said, this is a national problem. There's an issue of pipeline availability, and therefore it's one that a lot of places are trying to figure out. So I'm trying to see if we have any more information of what that might look like, or what incentives or consequences may be out of succeeding in this role.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that we know of definitively is, I want to say in particular for almost 3 or 4 years ago, the state began to actually report on this as an area. And so, I can see that becoming something that becomes even more front-facing. We've always tracked it, over the last few years, but it's become a more front-facing metric that the state is using.
Dr. Highlander.
Thank you. I've been on that committee with Ms. Murray and Ms. Fogelman, and I've read through this, and our department is really working very diligently to recruit as many minorities as we can. And Penny, we've been to meetings in Nashville, and they start bringing things up from this policy, and we're already doing it. And it's their goals, and the problem I've seen with my former students, and I've tried, the minority students, I've tried to encourage education. I say, Dr. Connor, I'd really like to teach, but I can make 10 times as much money as a doctor, or 5 times as much as an engineer. So, there are some outstanding young people out there. We just need to continue to encourage them, go into education and serve others. If they have a heart for service, then we want to try and get them. And that's our desire. But I think Mr. Fogelman and now Ms. Murray is working with me on, and we are already doing, from what I've been on that committee with you guys, everything I've seen on here, we're already doing. So I don't think it's going to be a major problem for us. You, Dr. Johnson?
I don't. I would say what's a problem, what will be a problem is what's always been a problem. It's been a problem to recruit diverse talent, but as far as this policy and its implementation and us trying to be aggressive within the construct of what we've done, I think we've got to continue to do it. I think the elevation, though, does identify, make it clear that it's an issue that we've got to continue to lean into. I mean, and here's a final point. Our school demographic is, we're roughly 30% black, 50% white, and about 14-15% Hispanic, and about 4 or 5% other, right? And so, if you took that by 10, you got 5, 5, 3, 5, 3, and then 1.5, and then another half-ish is what you like to see. You like to see that in hiring. You want as much as you can your educator force to be reflective of the students that they're serving. And so, It's a gap, you know, statewide, nationally, it's a gap, you know, obviously for us here locally, and we try to implement strategies, and we'll continue to ramp them up, based on this policy work.
Cecilia?
As we have this conversation, some of this occurred to me a couple times, is our commitment to expecting excellence. And I think the point that Scott made early on, that this policy is not just been asked of us, but asked of every school district in Tennessee. And not every one of them has a strategic plan like ours, where we're watching those KPIs related to minority recruitment and retention of professionals. I did notice in item 2 and item 4 on line 26 and 31, statement that to me adds power to this, and that helps us think more intentionally about the work that we do. And I'm looking at the one that's on our board document, not the state board policy, but the policy we're considering voting on that's on our electronic agenda with the red. But it's the phrase, identify any potential barriers, and another that says eliminate potential barriers to entry. So those, to me, we have been doing that, but by putting that into words, I think that will give Penny's team more direction on the kind of work we want them to do. Because, you know, part of the reality that we've maintained 90% white teachers and 10% minority teachers over several years, despite efforts. Some of that's could be because we've lost minority teachers. And when I've talked with leaders of the Alliance, I'm going to say the Teachers of Color Alliance, you know, not every work environment is hospitable to a teacher who is of minority race. And so identifying potential barriers, really looking inward at ourselves and how might our structure be hindering our efforts. So I think that that's a useful part of this policy.
Well, I would just make one comment before we move on. To me, this what the state has done here reminds me a lot of Title IX legislation in regards to being mindful. Just at my workplace, so much is geared around Title IX, and there's a lot of misinterpretation around those laws. And the reality of that is that institutions should be working towards a goal. It's not a mandate to make sure that you're getting X, Y, and Z. It's that, as we said here, when you look through these, and I'm just saying the things that we're already doing that I recognize here demonstrate purposeful work from our school system. And so, anyway, again, it reminds me a lot of that Title IX type stuff, and not just in athletics, but across the board in higher education. And so many times folks misinterpret those laws and those mandates, and they can get out of whack quickly. So, right. Anything else there that you'd like to take a look at on the agenda?
Are we going to actually talk about the policy 6.5, or what are we going to talk about that separately?
We are. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about a couple of things here. One, I want you to see on the agenda just the addition of item 8 there on the numeral 8. Probably that will be from here on out just standard on our agenda, you know, so that if there is an item there, it's already on our agenda, and those that need to, Scott, from a parliamentary type process, just tell us how.
Yeah, so at the next,
presentations, Chief. The disclaimer statement.
right, so before the board votes, whether it's just by consent or there's an actual item that you have to vote on, it's appropriate for any board member who's casting a vote that would impact someone in his or her household to make this specific disclaimer. And household is actually defined very broadly. It's there, so anyone who is casting a vote can refer to it and think, okay, wait a minute, I actually have someone who would be affected by this. Typically, when we have a budget vote, I remind you of this, and you have this, and those of you who have family in the system, you read the disclaimer. But frankly, this year, because a lot of votes are impacting the employment of teachers, whether it's a COVID decision or a policy decision or whatever else, it occurred to me after Mr. Perez made his disclaimer, kudos for you, you listened to your TSDA training. It occurred to me, you know what, we probably just ought to go ahead and have this here in front of you for easy reference just in case. I know that Mr. Perez has a spouse in the system. I know that Dr. Highlander's got some relatives, but I frankly don't know. You have a daughter, that's right. So yeah, we're in that season where we're making a lot of decisions that have regular impact on folks who are family within the statute. So this is just a good built-in suspenders approach.
Go ahead, Mr. President.
Do we have to because I also have sisters-in-law in the system, and I see that they have relations-in-law, and do we have to specify, and do we have to specify what item it will pertain to?
So if you're, I think that's a good practice to be specific. You don't have to name your relative, obviously, but you can say,
I have relatives.
I have a spouse and I have a sister-in-law, both of whom are employed in the system, and both of whom would be affected by my vote on item number such and such. Nevertheless, I certify that I'm casting my vote in the best interest of the system.
So do we do that when it's time to be voted on, or we do it in the beginning and say, remember so-and-so?
The reason we put it up here at the start is so that you can go ahead and make the disclosure, and then you have free debate. Because sometimes, I mean, let's be honest, sometimes when things are going on and on and on, y'all forget what the motion is. So better to go ahead and do the disclaimer at the front than wait and do it at the end. And that way, you disclosed your interest, and that way the public knows, for accountability reasons, anything that you say in the context of the debate is, in your view, the best interest of the system. And by and large, whenever we have budgets or other big issues, y'all have always done this. It's just, again, we're in that season where everything we touch seems to impact employees. This is probably a good prophylactic measure to go ahead and put it on the specific. Yes, sir.
Question, I don't think I've ever mentioned specific relationships, I just say I have a family member, is that not sufficient?
It's sufficient, but the statute actually does list them out, and I think where you've got multiple ones, it's probably, again, it's prophylactic. The purpose of the statute is fresh air and sunshine. You put out there everything that someone might point a finger at. If you're not particularly concerned, and you say, I have a relative, and then someone calls you and says, Dr. Highlander, I noticed the vote that you cast that was kind of favorable to this group, is that the relative you're talking about? I know that you would answer that question in the interest of being transparent. But you might as well just go ahead and say, I have a spouse and a sister-in-law, or I have a niece or a grandchild. At some level, it's really your discretion. You've been doing this long enough, everyone knows your kinship. But I think that in something like this, for transparency's sake, more information is a little bit better than less.
We put more pressure on that person. Or what,
That's why I said your discretion. The way I read the statute, it's more about your interest. And so I think, back to Mr. Perez's point about do you identify the specific item, I think you do. So let's say, for instance, it's a teacher race, and maybe you have one relative who wouldn't be affected by the race because it was classified. Maybe you have another relative who absolutely would be affected by it. I think in that scenario, I think you can say, I have a relative who is a teacher who would be affected by this. Even so, in that way, your disclosure is specific enough that no one can quibble with whether you have violated the spirit of transparency. At the end of the day, you're guided by your conscience on this issue. The touchstones are transparency. If someone later can come back and say, I don't think you were transparent before you cast your vote, they can attack the integrity of the vote itself. So again, I think more information is better than less, but I also don't think that the statute requires you to produce your genealogy.
All right. So anyway, that disclaimer will be there for your reference from now until. Okay. So anyway, it will be there if you need to use it. Again, it's right before the consent agenda. So even if the specific item that you are referencing is not pulled, you've covered it. Okay. Before that, there's just one vote on the consent. All right. So now a couple things here. Well, we got anything else there? I want to go ahead and get these two items real quick. That I told you about at the very beginning. If you want to ask some questions about those now, the first would be the budget amendment there that you have, general purpose budget amendment. You've got some bullet points there that are specific around what would be amended. So if you've got some questions, now would be the time to ask those. Let's look at the calendar. Got that item also there. No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll let
Oh, I'm sorry, the boss of us went out of here, so, okay, third bullet point, for reducing appropriation for custodial services. Is this because, this is the second round of CARES funding that we would be using, and that's why we're moving it out of one line into another? Yes, okay. So the fourth item here would be to utilize the additional BEP revenue and local tax revenues to fund the step increases effective July 1, 2020, which we did that already. A 1% salary increase effective January 1, 21. So I want to ask a question about that, and then the related pass-through adjustments. So this additional BEP revenue is our one-time BEP revenue, correct? Yes? Okay.
That's cool.
And that revenue is expected to be what number? That amount of money from the state legislature or Governor Lee, whoever wants to claim it as their.
The amount, it's 1.8 million.
So we'll get 1.8 million from the state in additional one-time funding for teacher pay. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And a 1% salary increase across the board will cost us how much?
For the 6 months will be, 3.1. Yeah, it's about 3 million for a full year for all people. And then for the certified nurses, which are covered by the BEP, it's about 1.2 with benefits.
Wait, say that again. Your question, Jenny, was what? What was your question to her?
All right, so I'm trying to break down
Yeah.
what we're really doing here. So,
If you look at the second page, there's more detail. That might help.
okay.
So that shows where the 1.8 in the middle column.
Okay, so if y'all don't mind, I just want to walk through this out loud. So the state is going to provide $1.8 million for appropriations for staff. We're going to take 67 of that and provide that to our charter schools because that's part of the agreement and how we work with them. And then we've got step increases here, but so we're going to need to add an additional $1 million to that cost to be able to give everybody, 1% classified. Sorry, this is just the first time I'm seeing this. I just want to make sure that I understand how much our system is adding into the state money to be able to allow everybody to have a 1% increase.
Yes.
That's the number I'm
Right.
trying to get to.
The state money is just
So,
Yeah, the state money is a one-time money, but we're talking about a 1% raise that would be.
correct.
for
And then
forever.
also, and then, yeah, so we are, you know, we want to be as aggressive as possible, but also fiscally responsible. And so, you'll also note there, under uses, that first line item is to appropriate the 3.1, because as we went and looked, you know, I had a chance to speak to each of you, we did, over the last week, just trying to look at bonus versus recurring, what's the best approach. And so as we continue to evaluate revenue, Mary Ellen and Nakia, just evaluating where we are, and Penny, what's the best approach to, you know, really supporting our teachers and leaders. And also, you all know we've given bonuses in the past, and as we conference collaboratively, it's one of those items where they always embrace it, but they also really, I won't say embrace the bottom line, but it really embracing us, putting it in the base, make sure it's base salary generating in the go forward. So we wanted to ensure that if we did that, that we had the funds to fund it. And so that's really the 3.1 that you see there is us saying, if the state is unable to come through, which we all know when the governor stated the state, he's also said that there will be additional funds, the projected additional funds will be in the VP. But if they don't, we want to be able to have the funds to continue to fund it going forward. So that's the 3.1 that's reflected there. That's the difference, which in essence equates to what additional we're putting in to be able to fund it.
Okay, thank you. I'll study this some more and get with
Okay,
you guys.
so
about
Jenny,
that.
I think I'm trying to be clear about what Jenny, because this is one-time money, this 1.8 million, so after this year it's gone. Okay, so we're having to add another 3.1 million to that 1.8 million. Is that what I'm getting? No. Okay. That's if we get the money back from the state.
That's based on sales tax revenue.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the 5.7 million, okay. Budget increase total, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong line, 5.7 million. So, we're having to come up with the difference between the 1.8 and the 5.7? No?
No. Is it?
Okay, we're having to come up with that money. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at also. Okay, so we're having to come up with that
We are.
money, so we're paying one-time money for reoccurring expenses, and I never like doing that. So what you're saying, that you were hoping to get 3.1 million, okay, I'm like, Jeannie, I'm gonna have to sit and look at this. This is reason.
Yeah, so what we're doing, the bottom line is what we're also doing is making sure that in the go forward, based on our sales tax revenue projections, our budget can support it going forward. So that's why we're putting aside the 3.1 million, to your point, because it's the one-time 1.8 that we're getting, and we need to be able to fund it going forward. So that's what the 3.1 will allow us to do.
I've got a quick question. I like these ladies. I too need to ponder over this a little bit. Are we going to look any more at our legislative delegation's recommendation of how we do the money or not?
Well, this accomplishes that and then some. This does accomplish that and then some.
It's kind of like they gave us a gift subscription for 3 months to the Fruit of the Month Club, but we get to buy the other 9 months, really, what they've done.
I also want to be clear, and I think you may have a copy of this, or we'll pass around a copy, the one that says teacher pay, like there's conflicting guidance from the State Department around what to do. So
Right.
this
That's
does
what I'm
accomplish,
referring to.
this does accomplish that, but it's also, again, as we've been able to do, fortunately, over the last few years, is really try to make an investment in teachers, leaders, and staff. So.
Go ahead, Mr. McLean.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, the one-time money, but there is conversations going on to make it a permanent. So it's one-time money. It was passed in the special sessions, but it's something they're tackling in this budget. It's just not set in stone that it will be reoccurring at this time. But there is a good possibility that Governor Lee and the legislators want to make it reoccurring. That just hasn't happened yet, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. He presented, I want to say, call the number out, I want to say it was 125 million is what I want to say he was appropriating towards or proposed to be appropriated towards the BP component. So that's correct.
Thank you. Can I look at the top line on the local sources? So the local tax revision of a positive 8 million, that's from sales tax?
Yes, that's from sales tax.
Okay, and then there's a negative 2,700,000. Is that from property tax?
No, in the original budget, there was a line for the mixed drink settlement fund, so that's correcting that.
Okay.
Just removing that line, so going forward, that
Okay,
won't be in the budget.
So we lose
And then
2,700,000, then we have a 1.6 million addition, and that's from CARES.
yes, that's reducing an expense item that'll be reimbursed from CARES.
Okay, so that's a reimbursed expense item from CARES.
Yes.
So we received 1.6 million plus an extra 8 million, okay. And then minus 2.7. I know everyone wants to look at it, but I'm gonna ask now. So the 3.1, as I'm going through it, that's for next year for funding that 1% increase. Okay, so that doesn't touch this. Okay, that helped me out. Thank you. Assuming, sorry, I'll finish, but assuming that we do not see the increase in revenue continue through next year, and assuming that we do not receive continual funds from the state for next year.
That is.
If we do receive those, we put away $3 million into our fund that we can decide at this time next year what we do with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is exactly correct. We don't want to fund something permanent that we don't have the funds to be able to support going forward.
Right.
All right, anyone else there on that amendment? All right, then, we don't have anything else on the agenda. Take a look out, we'll move quickly here into, unless y'all
Are you gonna go over the calendar?
I didn't want to make mention of it, but I will. I know Rhonda's going to vote yes this year. Calendar, the calendar.
Graduation schedule right.
Well, we fixed it. Calendar.
I was impressed that they already know which days are rain days.
Yeah,
When I look at that.
Well, they had me to do it being at two different graduations at the same night, the same time. One of them's in Sale Creek and one of them's at Memorial Auditorium.
Well, so that let me make a public disclaimer, because we will be releasing the graduation schedule in the coming days. I see Channel 12 peeking from behind. The board's seen a draft. We're still in draft form, trying to get it finalized. But before you use the calendar, and so obviously a little bit later this year because of COVID, in probably a couple 3 months, we'll be bringing hopefully a 22-23 calendar to you to get back on cycle. But I'll let you take a look at it. No significant changes there, but definitely want to answer any questions.
This is the one the majority, Dr. Towns is correct, that the majority of our constituents wanted.
Dr. Hollander, yes, we did update the survey. I think we talked about that last time. If Jim Bronson, do you want to give us a little bit of background on what we heard this time around, updating the survey that we did 3 years ago?
Yep, so we administered a survey and asked families to give us some feedback specifically around fall break and Thanksgiving break. We offered options that included a full week for both fall break and Thanksgiving break, but roughly 40% of our more than 11,000 respondents said they wanted to keep a full week for fall break and a short week of Thanksgiving. With spring break, we offered the option of keeping it aligned with the Easter holiday or aligning it with the UT system, and overwhelmingly respondents, we had about 52% say they wanted to keep it aligned with the Easter holiday.
Thank you. I have one question about that. That's all right. I'm just counting the weeks between breaks, and like you've got a really long period there of 7 weeks in between. You're all educators. Tell me about that.
The third quarter is tough. As a former teacher and school administrator, it's always tough. This proposed calendar may be a smidge tougher. What I'd go back to is a couple of years ago, if you all remember, one of the big areas of feedback we got was around the start of the second semester and trying to start back as soon as possible. Obviously, we know that parents go back to work, and we would anticipate most parents will go back January the 3rd. So, that allows us to get our 2 PD days in and students to start pretty quickly, which is about as early a start as we've had in the last couple of years for the start of the second semester. But to your point, Ms. Perez, what helps a little bit is, you have MLK Day in January, you have a President's Day in February. In February, and then the month of March is a tough day, is a tough month. There is a PD day that we try to put in there pretty strategically, to try to get what you end up with is a 3 week or so kind of cadence, and you get something within there. But I think you're exactly right. It's inevitable. I mean, you'll see there's 53 instructional days there. Now, I will say this: you always want as many instructional days in the first 3 quarters as you can possibly get, because when you get into that fourth quarter, it gets into assessment season, and
Well, I was going to ask that next. Where is testing in that? It's just that Easter is late, and so where do we fall on tests? Like right after that, right before that?
Right after. So usually within a week or 2. Usually what happens is we come back, and there's usually about a week of instruction, maybe a week and a half, and then we jump into TN Ready.
I did want to add to the point though about the long slog. This is, and I think it was Ms. Robinson who said about not there not being support to move spring break. That's why, and we had this conversation before. I mean, we ran into this even with COVID. So many other districts around the state are following the UT system, and we are not, and so when people start considering what to do when there is a disruption, they are, and that's what happened to us last year around COVID, and we tried to address it because our spring break is late, and I think of the large districts, we may be the only one who's still associated with Easter, which also keeps us moving, right? Easter can go from the last week of March to almost the last week of April. And when it's almost the last week of April, to your point, that is a hard slog from January, right?
Not just for teachers, but the students.
No, absolutely. So I just wanted to say, we talked about it, and it just doesn't seem to have support here that it's been traditional. I've heard various things as to why that is. But we are unusual amongst large school districts in terms of still being attached to Easter as opposed to the UT system.
Mr. McClendon?
I think I ask this every year. How many total stockpile days do we have, like snow days and that kind of thing? I can never remember the exact number.
So now I'll speak to this. Historically, you all recall when I got here in 2018, we had 9. We backed that up to 8 because I think Dr. Highlander and we asked some others and people were like, it seems like it's a lot of stockpile days that we end up not using. We backed it up to 8, and now in this proposed calendar, we backed down to 7 because we're adding another PD day at the beginning of the year. So we are now at 7 stockpile days for inclement weather if we could not conduct school in any capacity.
Dr. Highlander?
Just real briefly, and you guys have done a great job compiling this and the survey. What a lot of systems have done to make them a little more spread out is they have had it a week earlier, ending with Good Friday. But I'm not trying to redo your schedule, but I know it's quite a few systems around us have made it 1 week earlier than ours, and it would spread out a little bit more, but it gives us a little bit longer break this way. I will say the third quarter, Mr. Perez, in all my years teaching, we've lost more days due to weather in the third quarter than any other.
That's a good point.
Is that not right, Dr. Johnson, in your observation?
That's 100% correct.
That's one reason I think it's positive to have more academic days in that third quarter. And that third quarter, we need to push to get ready for the testing. Thank you.
In fact, as a disclaimer, we're actively watching the weather tonight, and so.
Dr. Highlander's already offering his house.
No, it's not just a freeze.
Dr. Johnson and I together are both fairly close, and so we'll split the group up if we get iced in.
Well, and if you were, let's just for talking, and I don't want you to bog down the calendar, because I've always said this is the most 50-50 split up. What did you say, Ms. Bronson? Overwhelmingly 52%? That is overwhelming when you talk about the calendar. That is a majority. But if you took spring break and aligned it with higher ed in Tennessee, you're talking about the second week of March. So then put spring break right there and count how many weeks consecutive until you get to the end. You're talking about 9 to 10 weeks straight, as opposed to what we're looking at where it is right now. And anyway, just food for thought on that. Right, anything else on the calendar?
I just have a question.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, the survey that went out, I didn't know if something regarding like summer school and extended school days was going to be a part of this conversation. I was just wondering, are we, that survey that went out, are we going to be talking about those results at some point, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So Neely is working on summer planning. I put a little blurb in there around it last night, but yeah, absolutely. So the thought with that, let's be clear. Since you brought that up, I want to make sure we're clear. It's not so much that it's mandatory, anything that we're looking at. Now, the piece I will mention is that there was new legislation around learning loss, which will require some summer programming availability, and which will stand up for sure. We know that right now the legislation calls for 6 weeks of that programming. So We're looking at standing that up and offering an optional way. And frankly, was one of the considerations we had to make when looking at this calendar and trying to figure out when to start, and not because of some of what's going to be happening in regards to opportunities for students in second semester or in the summer.
Okay. Anybody need a quick break? We move to this position statement. It's okay if you do. All right, let's keep rolling then. All right, so I believe we don't have a separate document there in front of you, but I believe if you go to board policy 6.501, that's the statement. So if you've got that pulled up in front of you, take a look at that. Just backing up, recall that at our last equity discussion, we were got to the point where we said, hey, we'd like for Mr. Bennett, Dr. Drake and her team to craft something here that we can see, take a look at, going off of what kind of our comments at that last meeting. And so I'm going to quickly let Mr. Bennett address it, and then we can jump right into it.
So the draft that you have in front of you is really the product of several weeks of discussions and back and forth. Dr. Drake and I probably started wrangling this and initially had some of the data points that the administration had presented to the board embedded into a policy, kind of like an argument. And the premise was basically if you look at the achievement amongst students in Hamilton County, there are some that are well below the curve. And if you look across the county, those students who are below the curve are uniformly minority students, and it doesn't minority or lower income or in other categories. And it doesn't matter where you are in the county, those subgroups perform below the expected performance level of majority students, regardless of school, regardless of location. And so what we started with was an argument basically that if you accept this data as true, then if the system is going to push itself forward, is going to continue to grow and to advance, then out of enlightened self-interest, the school system has to focus on pulling up its underperforming segments. And as we were working with this, it started to feel an awful lot like a plan. And it started to feel an awful lot like something that the administration would be developing in terms of, okay, here's how we see the problem, we're going to go out and fix it. And so after looping in the rest of the administration's voices, including Ms. Bronson and Dr. Towns and Dr. Johnson, we kind of took a step back a little bit and focused much more on common terms. And if you look at this, you'll find nothing new from what the board talked about back in its first two meetings about equity, where Dr. Drake led us through some analysis talking about basically just shared vocabulary. What do we mean by equity? What do we mean by closing the achievement gap, et cetera? And so really, this policy is much more like a 30,000-foot flyover. Here are our shared terms. Here are the concepts that we agree on. And if you look down to the very bottom, the quote-unquote action item that you see the policy directing the administration to do starts at 34, but it really speaks to the administration's directed to come up with an equity plan, an educational equity plan. And at 36, you'll see the educational equity plan should have the purpose of closing the opportunity gap and creating equity for all students in Hamilton County. Strategies for achieving this purpose include, but are not limited to, valuing diversity, increasing opportunities for inclusion, building cultural competency, and setting rigorous expectations for all students. So so rather than getting quite as granular as maybe we had been doing, we kind of took a step back, or rather, and I'll kick this to Nakia and Jennifer and whoever else wants to speak on this, or maybe Marcia, and just sort of talk about how we really decided to focus more on broader concepts that this board could speak to and say, this is what we believe. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We're not going to tell you to get in the weeds. But broadly speaking, this is what the board thinks. And so then what you will see is the administration would develop a plan in months and years to come, updating it regularly, that really speaks to evolving circumstances. Because hopefully, as the administration rolls up its sleeves and digs into this, the situation improves. And so you set the bar higher, and you set the bar higher, and you set the bar higher. Okay, so enough of that. I'm looking, is it Marcia or Dr. Towns?
You're exactly right. What we have in front of you are the things that we agreed upon when we met in November. I think that was our last meeting, and we thought that it was important to include the terms that you defined and that we agreed upon within this policy. Just as Rhonda talked about earlier, we're already doing some things, and this will also give us an opportunity to update the board on those annually, and that we will continue to move in this direction. Are there any questions?
Just have one observation.
Sure.
Closing schools affected the opportunity gap more than anything. I hope that we think long and hard before we do that. I'm just heartbroken by some of the things I'm seeing, some of the students missing out on so much education, and it's hurt the most vulnerable the most. And we're going to have a really hard time playing catch up, and it just breaks my heart. I just hope we think long and hard before we do that again. It's one thing this board can do to help lessen the achievement gap, is actions that we take sometimes hurt students.
I had a couple of thoughts about just a little additional language. Having read the teacher diversity policy and noticing that important phrase, eliminating potential barriers, I wonder if what the board would think about adding that perhaps after building cultural competency, semicolon, eliminating potential barriers, semicolon, and setting rigorous expectations. Again, with the point that we don't know if there are barriers, but that if we put that there, it becomes something that we can be aware of.
What line was that?
Yeah.
That's on line 1 of the second page. And then the other thing, I would like us to think a little bit about the frequency of updates to the board, without becoming a really prescriptive. I would expect, given this administration's commitment to data, that you all would have KPIs within your plan. But we look at the Future Ready strategic plan every single month as a board. You all highlight something that's very important to you. We get a bullying report quarterly. This educational equity plan for me as a board member is every bit as important as reducing bullying in our school. And frankly, every bit as important as our strategic plan, because I do think that it is, if we don't tackle this, we will not be able to reach our strategic plan goals. So I would like just a little bit of feedback from you all on, can we really get done the work we need to do if we're only looking at it mid-year and end of year? Or do we need quarter? I see Tiffany shaking her head. So yeah, I'd like to discuss the frequency that we include in this policy. I don't know if monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, but
At least quarterly, at least.
Yeah. And this is something that Scott and I went back on, and Scott and I, we've had several versions, but I do remember we did have quarterly in one of our versions.
I feel like, this work is, yeah, no doubt, like, just as important as Jenny's pointing out, that, like, frequently looking at it, it is long play work, and so I feel like quarterly makes the most sense to make sure that there's not fatigue from, there's going to be quarters where we're able to move the needle tremendously, and there's going to be quarters where we're not able to move, we're not going to see the needle being moved because it's long play, such, like, systematic work, and so I would suggest quarterly, but that's just my opinion, so.
My question on that would be, what data is necessary in order to be able to
Yeah, like, what
measure
are we
that
looking at?
over a period of time?
Well-
And if you've actually are able every quarter to provide data that would show significant improvement or
So if you
Yeah, I
go
think,
ahead, go
yeah,
ahead,
well,
Roger.
and I was gonna say, because equity threads through all of our goals, so, there should be data on all of everything, that we could add. It's not just, the academic part, but.
Yeah, to her point, I think it's very easy for us to disaggregate, and we already do the benchmark results, discipline, things of that nature that are really
so it could be different data every quarter.
that are stuff that we're
Yeah,
already
kind of,
grabbing on
yeah,
a
like-
continuous basis already. Depending on what all is within that plan and what all KPIs come out of it, some of them may be a little more difficult to get on a quarterly basis.
Yeah.
But definitely, and this is just the two at the top of mind, benchmarks and student discipline are two that we can easily grab on a quarterly basis.
Well, and I guess for me, I'm thinking about how I imagine how this plan might, as you all develop it, just based on the way that you organize other information that's highly complex for us and for the public, I imagine there will be some kind of themes or categories related to it. And so in the same way that on Thursday, we're going to hear about the work that Blake is leading related to Future Ready Institutes and post-secondary opportunities, perhaps if we're on a quarterly basis, maybe we're not getting a full KPI of everything, but we are getting an update on the overarching work within the plan, the things you're learning. I think the more we can have this in front of us, the better we as a board are going to get into a habit of thinking about this. But also, I could also see that it would affect how you might bring us information for our Future Ready updates also. So.
I have one more question. So the policy, since I've been here and since I've followed a lot of your work, this has been the intention, it's always been the intention of the strategic plan to see improvement in all these areas. So help me just understand this as we oversee this policy, how this policy is empowering you or supporting you in a way that we haven't been doing. Like what specifically are we giving you here for future growth?
So, in the future, so now what I'll go back and do is develop action steps and give me a more focused point on actual equity within the district, such as looking deeply at the benchmark data and looking at how our subgroups are performing and actually bringing in some strategies or talking with them about what we can do to improve that. With the discipline, what some other things that, we've already looked at it and we've already done some things such as creating some of the, our social emotional learning department, but it'll give me the opportunity to spend more laser focused time on the action steps that, that I am accountable for.
Thank you.
And I think one of the points that's there, like, to Marcia's point, we've had, several districts had, but significant disproportionalities in the amount of black students that are suspended in comparison to it. It's something actually at the federal government level and state level that's a monitored metric for us. I also want to mention that our district is becoming increasingly diverse from an English learner, an English, if I could speak English, an English learner standpoint. You know, more and more and more of our learners are, in particular, in some concentrated pockets of our schools, and so that's a subgroup that we have to pay keen attention to. And then, as always, our students with disabilities. So we've got, you know, and y'all have seen that data that 70% of our test takers are in an identified subgroup, and if we're going to accelerate, you know, student achievement, we've got to lean into these areas. So what this policy does is really says this is critical work to the board, which then, you know, empowers us to say, okay, this is important work, right, for us to be able to do. Now, I want to be clear. We've got folks that are jumping into this work, like Neely is leading her team through that lens. Penny has, you know, done a phenomenal amount of work in that area. Obviously, Marsha in kind of coordinating things. But this is, you know, I think an appropriate next step in talking about, you know, educational equity and taking the next steps for our system.
I just wanted to ask a question, make a comment, kind of piggybacking off what Marco asked about the data. I was taking the state survey that went out recently to parents in Hamilton County, and I thought it was really interesting that like halfway through the survey, and it's probably like close to 100 questions long. It's pretty long, or you know, it's got like you're like required to click like 100 different bubbles. It actually spends some time asking you if you feel comfortable as a parent at your child's school, and I thought that was really interesting. I don't know what we're doing right now to capture that type of data on a regular basis, but I think it would be pretty imperative to the equity work to figure out how to do that more often. So I guess I'm kind of making a statement and a question at the same time, like, are we doing that work? If not, could we look into, you know, how do we capture that data on a regular basis? I just think that, you know, what goes along with equity is making sure that people are feeling obviously very included and that we're creating an inclusive environment, and we're not just looking at data points that are they're not secondhand, that's not the right wording for it, but, you know, it's almost like kind of after the fact data, you know?
So is your question, would we give that survey more than once a year when you say?
Maybe it is. I mean, I'll be honest
Okay.
with you. I don't know that a lot of the families in my district have taken that survey or will take that survey. So I feel
Right.
like that's a piece that we have to figure out. Like, how do we really make sure that our, if one piece that makes someone, you know, in the minority, it's that, you know, they don't have access to internet. Like, you know, I have a lot of English language learners in my district, so therefore their parents may not be taking that survey because they may not be getting it, or they may not understand it. They may not feel like, they feel like, you know, they're very private because they feel like the government is, you know, there's just a lot of barriers there is all I'm really saying. And so I don't know the right way to do it, but what are the right ways to do it is one question that I have. And the second is, how can we go collect that data on a more regular basis and be really intentional in figuring out, are we really being inclusive? Like, you know, are we really being inviting?
Is this the state?
No.
Yeah,
Well,
this was the
is our
state, this was the
climate
state survey.
So-
Yeah.
So let me,
Yeah, this was the state survey
yeah,
that I took.
we have, so that's, I wanted to comment, like, we're very sensitive to survey fatigue. We survey a lot, guys. Now, no, it's a great point, but this survey that you're talking about, we just sent out, is the one that we launched 3 years ago, using the state form. That's our climate survey, and it actually informs some of the metrics on our Future Ready 2023 plan. I think you make an excellent point about what are our feedback cycles. I even remember Dr. Johnson and I, we were talking about, it was in another frame, but this is a similar point, like how with customer service, like sometimes it's just like, you know, click a red button on your way out or a green button on your way out to say that you have a good experience here. Like we need to think about ways to get more snapshot information. And frankly, a lot of it needs to probably happen when people are on site at the schools, particularly in some of our urban communities, because their experience is being informed by what happened when they had to go there for a parent-teacher conference, when they had to go there for a discipline conference, for an IEP conference. And if there was a way for us to be able to capture that feedback as they left the building, you know, I think that would be helpful to us as more real time.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. I mean, I'm just thinking about, like, it's really phenomenal that our board is doing this work, but to be frank, like, the work of this, the work that we're talking about here, like, it's got to be captured almost in real time and just really be focused on how do we really make sure that every family is giving us feedback. And so I guess that you could, in a lot of ways, you could build an entire campaign and plan around that alone, because it's such it's very detailed and hard work.
But I do think, to your point, just to wrap that point, that's a plan piece that I think we put in. And I think, to the point, like the state climate survey is a phenomenal tool, and we've used it in budget development and everything else. But overwhelming for some, right? It needs to be, to think it's one quick snapshot on specific areas of domain. So those are the kinds of things that we would work into a plan, and as the plans develop, would want to hear from, like, each of you around specific areas. I know you as an example, Tiffany. I know we've had conversations about our ELL population, our Latinx community, and just some of the schools in your, so like what explicitly, we talk about transition school, transition program. Some of these things take investment, but that's those are the kinds of things that I think we've got to continue to look at if we're going to serve our community and really accelerate student achievement, because these are the areas that we are challenged in. And I'll just say this, we talk about, I'll go back to the disproportionality. I was having this conversation with Neela and Blake. We're talking about this today. When we look at our disproportionality in black students that are suspended, the truth is, some of the achievement gap we do to ourselves because they're out of school too much for suspension. So what are the other strategies? What are we doing to try to keep kids in school? Are we exhausting every avenue to keep kids in school? And what steps do we need to take around that? So those are conversations that we've got to have more deeply going forward and working to figure out.
You sent us an example of something that, when I thought about eliminating potential barriers, the Flex Academy pilot that we're trying out at Howard, that allows students to learn and earn credits on a different kind of schedule. To me, that's a great example of something that might come out of having a policy like this, because we're putting a finer point on the necessity of thinking in a different way.
Right. Any other discussion there around that proposed policy?
So, just for clarity's sake, I want to make sure we're clear. Marcia, quarterly is what we hear in regards to desire. Is that the board's pleasure on reporting?
Yeah, let me try to formulate my thought here, but I think maybe what I'm missing when I look at the policy, and I'm not saying it has to be in the policy, but when I think of the reporting, is thinking in terms of KPIs and whatever, is what are we, it's not just benchmarks, it's not just suspensions. So when I think of quarterly, I think in terms of different items that we're looking at that are actually speaking to the whole picture, right? So just to take off a little pressure from, or even to take it away from being simply push the button each quarter and give us some new statistic or some same statistics, like are we really improving in this area and what is being done? And so maybe that's, when I think of quarterly, I think of it as terms.
Okay, absolutely. Also, I know you had said something about eliminating barriers after cultural competencies.
Yeah, I can send you guys a marked up copy if you want.
Okay. I just want to make sure
Oh,
that
yeah,
that's
yeah, if
something
anybody else has.
that needed to be added as well.
Identifying and eliminating.
Or, well, I was just using the language, from the state.
from
Eliminating potential barriers was the
from
phrase, if you all are comfortable with that. Okay. And it'll be a first read for the policy, so
That's
then
true.
if people
That's
have
true.
issues with it, they can.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is a good point. It will be first read, so we'll have an opportunity to look at whatever correction is added there before Thursday night, and then, anyway, there'll be a chance to address it again. All right, anything else on this?
What do you think that our next steps as a board is after this? I mean, in your mind, was this like kind of where we're gonna like leave this work, or do you think that we're gonna meet again to talk about like the next step? Or, I mean, I'm just curious.
Yeah,
Just curious
I think
your
we'll meet
views.
again. I think now that we've got a position, or we will have a position statement for the board, as Dr. Drake said, that's gonna, start to help her focus more directly. And then I think the next time that we meet, maybe we defer to her team, there to maybe identify for us, as she said. We saw a little bit of the data, we looked at that. Hey, here's some strategy around what we see and what we're thinking, and that will inform us as to where we're gonna go from there. So, yeah. But again, I'm open for all suggestions. I just wanna make sure that we're continuing the conversation and that we are purposefully discussing, so.
Thank you.
All right. With that, that'll do us till Thursday.
Dr. Johnson, Dr. Robertson, I've had several people in my district ask, do you have a plan yet for tomorrow? If we're looking at temperatures dropping, low freezing and wet, do we have when will you let them know what we're gonna do? They've asked me, and I said, I don't know, I don't make the decision.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna confer over here just a little bit, see what updates have come through here in the last couple hours, and hopefully here pretty soon we will
Yeah.
communicate.
Like you just had several parents ask me, and I was,
Our goal is always to do it at night, as much as we can, or the evening before, as much as
I
we
know you
possibly
do.
can.
I know you
So, trying to figure that out.
thank you very much.